Marilyn, though the strongest, wears the crown of the laziest demon lord. Forced into early retirement, he now bends his back to repay debts. Taking responsibility, he relocated to the 6 territories. Some hide their true power, pretending to be ordinary losers. Here, Molly quickly rose to fame not through overwhelming strength, but by other means. In the town of Merlin, Lucifer our man is currently penning the weekly report. Outside, the human army faces a brutal surprise attack, forced into battle against demon soldiers. Stepping up to handle the chaos, she uses hypnotic magic, turning friend and foe into a tangled mess of self-destruction. But then, a human female soldier with an iron will resists Lilith's enchantment. Charging headfirst to overpower Lilith without hesitation, that's Alice, the 233rd hero of the Land of Light. Lilith is stunned, finally realizing why her seductive magic fails. It turns out the enemy is also a woman. Switching to direct assault, Lilith half jokes, whispering that Alice will be her next trophy, but before she can go further, Alice draws her sword and strikes. Clash though only Lilith lands a decisive blow. She starts doubting what's so special about heroes Lilith's almost calling Alice ordinary. Alice bristles at that, firing back fiercely, but Lilith scoffs at the power of Alice's sacred sword, using dragon sinew hair to strike the sword, only to have it shredded in a blink. Unexpectedly, this weapon hides terrifying power. Meanwhile, Alice feigns death to escape Lilith's gaze. She's the sole survivor, the entire army reduced to ash. Lilith notices and, assuming Alice truly died, she mutters, "What a pity, such a pretty face lying on a tombstone," planning to add Alice's body to her collection. She hesitates at the bulky armor and decides just the head will do. But just as Lilith moves in, Alice suddenly jolts. Laughing aloud, she reveals her ruse. No more games for Lilith. She's set on punishing Alice for shaming her before her brother. Knowing she can't win, Alice turns to her favourite cat and mouse trick, summoning 2 wolves to chase the beautiful mouse. At that moment, Merlin arrives at the coast. To escape the 6 demon territories, one must cross the demon sea. From afar, he thinks luck smiles upon him, spotting some remaining army ships, but as he nears, he finds every vessel utterly destroyed and it's all from that earlier slash. The catch demons can't swim. Walking underwater is a nightmare, so there's Merlin, stuck fast with no escape. Though there's a small boat, the thought of paddling through the vast sea alone feels like a torment too great to bear. He's still racking his brain for a way out. Just then, Alice bursts onto the scene, running for her life, 2 wolves hot on her heels, death nearly within their grasp. In that moment, Alice recalled her master's words. Her master had warned her long ago, "Do not try to be a hero, for you are still far too weak." You are not a hero. You cannot fight against those who are not human. Back then, she had ignored this advice, eager to make a name for herself and escape the isolated snow mountain, believing that there she could never meet the Prince of White Horses. Now, she realized just how terrifying the outside world truly was. She begged the gods for one more chance at life. She promised to return only after becoming strong. She would strive to defeat even one wolf. So, she wasn't ready to die just yet. Just then, Merlin descended from the sky, effortlessly transforming the demonic wolf into an innocent puppy. Spotting Alice, he referred to her as a half-baked hero and marvellous. Alice declared that, since he had saved her life twice, she was now his property and must repay him by being his slave. Before she could react, he scooped her up and brought her to the small boat, planning to use her as a motor to paddle across the sea. After all, he was far too lazy to do it himself. How did things end up like this? Alice was supposed to defeat the Demon King and triumphantly return to marry the handsome prince, This holy war was meant to be her chance to grasp her fairy tale dream, yet all she held in her hands was a wooden paddle that stung with disappointment. Meanwhile, Merlin, carefree and basking in the glow of his protagonist status, told Alice that being his slave was a privilege. What? Vowing to repay this humiliation 1,000-fold upon returning home, she unleashed her fury upon the paddle and the boat, racing forward amidst the crashing waves. Merlin remained steady, unfazed, until Alice realised he was bracing himself against the side of the boat with his foot for balance. As night fell, Alice was exhausted from paddling non-stop, while Merlin casually pulled out a cooking set from who knows where and began preparing a fragrant meal. Catching the aroma, Merlin asked why Alice had stopped paddling and called her the most incompetent hero he had ever met. Alice couldn't believe this guy anymore. Her patience had finally reached its limit. She threw the paddle at him and declared her resignation from this ridiculous endeavour. Merlin offered to share his food, initially. Alice refused out of pride, but when her stomach growled, she reluctantly gave in and started eating. The food was so delicious that Alice unconsciously called Merlin master, eating while crying, admitting she truly had no courage at all. The aroma of the grilled meat attracted sharks. Frightened, Alice ran straight into Merlin's arms. With just a glare, Merlin made the sharks flee in terror. Alice was astonished, not understanding why the monsters had retreated, while Merlin took the opportunity to boast that he, the mightiest creature of the sea, was the reason for their departure. Alice didn't think so. She had heard tales of terrifying sea monsters lurking below and prayed they wouldn't encounter any. She explained that her army had smeared sacred dragon dung on the boat to ward off monster attacks. Upon hearing this, Merlin finally understood why Alice's army had such a terrible stench, or he reacted vehemently, starting to explain why sacred dragon dung was worth more than gold. But, unfortunately, that dragon had mysteriously disappeared. If Alice's words were true, selling dragon dung would help her pay off her debts without needing to work again. He immediately pulled out a contract crystal and revealed that the sacred dragon was indeed Barky, currently held captive by him. Merlin planned to use Barky's dung to pay off debts, feeling a sense of joy at not needing to leave this realm anymore. But then, disaster struck. Merlin's hand slipped, and the crystal containing the contract plummeted into the sea, not knowing how to swim. He had no choice but to continue his journey to the land of light with Alice. As they moved forward, they noticed the sea had suddenly gone eerily still, not a fish in sight. Merlin immediately became alert, sensing a powerful predator lurking nearby. At that moment, a sea monster emerged from below the surface right beneath them. However, Merlin was helpless, unable to swim, so Alice decided to take charge. She thrust her sword straight into the creature. The result? It did nothing. Instead, it only enraged the monster. Merlin tried to convince the sea beast to do something more meaningful with its pitiful existence. For example, it could toss them across the ocean to save them the trouble of swimming, but the monster merely spat water directly into his face. Then it began to suck in all the water around them, intending to swallow both him and the boat, which was about to splinter under the pressure. In that moment, Merlin finally drew his sword, and with a single slash, he vanquished the monster in the blink of an eye. Although Merlin was an arrogant and shameless jerk, Alice had now completely realised the truth. A wizard was indeed the most powerful being in this world. The remainder of their journey went smoothly. Before long, they set foot on solid ground. Merlin lamented that the recent trip had drained him, even though it was Alice who had been paddling the entire way. Alice called him out on his ridiculousness, but when she tried to justify herself, he claimed he had been masterminding their escape all along. Otherwise, they would have been dead long ago. Yeah, it sounded ridiculous, but it was oddly convincing. Regardless, Merlin decided to fire Alice, belittling her as being too useless to even be worthy of being his slave. He consoled her, saying not to be sad as it wasn't her fault. Destiny simply hadn't intended for her to be his slave for long. Alice stands speechless, stunned by Merlin's brazen trickery. She screams she never wants to see his face again, then turns away in fury. But before she can leave, Merlin calls her back, asking her to help remove Midori-Ra's armour. Alice protests immediately, but Merlin just starts taking it off himself, not because he's admiring the rugged landscape beneath, but because his pockets are empty. That precious Mitrin armour is the only thing he can sell now, and Merlin argues he deserves it for saving her life yet again. With that, he bolts, leaving Alice stripped bare on the shore. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Lily relaxes confidently, certain her useless brother will soon crawl back, begging after tasting the harshness of the outside world. As for Alice, when she returns to the city, she's not welcomed home, but immediately dragged to court. The court declares that because of her failures, the entire squad sent to eliminate Merlin was annihilated. Worse still, she lost the Mitrin armor. An heirloom passed down through generations of heroes. The judge strips Alice of her hero title and demands she repay the kingdom 50 million gold coins. Alice tries to explain the armor was stolen by the Demon King, but her pleas fall on deaf ears. The verdict was sealed long ago. A year passes, and now Alice is aboard a ship. She's here to rescue the mayor's daughter, held hostage. But her fighting is so poor that two pirates laugh in the middle of battle. Just as they're about to finish Alice off, a man suddenly falls from the sky. The two pirates shatter beneath his feet, dazed and asking, "Where are the two sacred rank guys?" Alice has to point out they're right under him. This man is clearly Merlin, disguised as a simple human. Because he heard rumours of sacred rank pirates and wanted to kill them to ease the pain of his curse. Before striking, Merlin even politely apologises, insisting he's not holding grudges. Then, with a single swing of his sword, he cuts down both foes. The shockwave is so powerful, it obliterates the rescue fleet Alice called. Alice, still unaware of the Demon King's true identity, doesn't recognise Merlin. Instead, she dreams this is a fateful meeting with a mysterious, dashing adventurer. She tiptoes closer, heart pounding, eager to see the face of her saviour. But Merlin soars into the sky like Superman before she can reach him. Soon after, a news reporter arrives to live stream the scene, announcing that the entire rescue fleet was wiped out by a mysterious criminal known nationwide as the Shadow Blade. Alice grabs the microphone from the reporter and boldly declares the Shadow Blade isn't a criminal. He's a hero who defeated the pirates. She praises him passionately, calling him the strongest and most elegant swordsman she's ever seen, even confessing her deep admiration. Alice returns home, adding 250 gold coins to her savings, bringing her total to 10,000. She beams with hope, thinking finally making progress. Only 49,990,000 gold coins left to clear my debt. Then she realised she was truly at rock bottom. She cursed. Merlin had not only ruined her reputation, but also pushed her into a debt trap. In a fit of rage, she slammed her hand on the table, spilling water all over the guild's paperwork she was meticulously reviewing. At that moment, she discovered a 5,000 gold coin bounty on a man living as a freeloader in the south. And of course, the subject was Merlin, with his trademark smug smile. Alice began to suspect, but quickly dismissed the idea that the Demon Lord could stoop so low as to leech off others. After all, she had many tasks ahead. Before leaving, she lit incense before the picture of the Dark Blade, kissed it, and prayed for luck in paying off her debts. At the same time, she also cursed the Demon Lord, wishing for him to fall into tenfold debt. She talked about Merlin for the past year. His reputation spread like wildfire as a notorious criminal. Yet what truly hurt his pride was the measly bounty of 5,000 gold coins. Is he really worth only that much? He kept posing to farm Aura until his stomach growled, forcing him to stop. The plan to sell the Midran armor for wealth had fallen flat as he squandered all his money within weeks. Truly a stroke of bad luck. Since then, he lived off freeloading and conning everywhere, doing anything, everything, to survive. Now he sought his next target and entered a small town. Before he could step inside, two bandits approached him, demanding his belongings. Merlin pulled out a reverse Uno card and demanded their stuff, leaving the bandits bewildered. Wondering if they were facing another robber, he insisted he was completely broke, but the two bandits only wanted his sword. Merlin tried to play it cool. If he drew his sword, his long face would contribute nothing to their plot, but they merely laughed, thinking Merlin was bluffing. One bandit even decided to show Merlin some cold hard skills, performing an impressively fancy apple-peeling trick that left the other bandit in awe. Merlin could be the greatest swordsman alive. Without letting them argue too long, he he calmly shoved the younger bandit aside and swiftly drew his sword, slicing the larger bandit into pieces. Revealing his true form, he was a goblin. The young bandit panicked, revealing himself as a goblin too, then fled to save his skin, leaving behind an apple that Merlin gleefully picked up to eat before entering the town. Afterward, the young goblin reported the incident to the Goblin King. The Goblin King viewed this as a blatant violation of the peace treaty between goblins and humans. In fact, he had planned to disguise some goblins as humans scattered around to provoke conflict. Now that a fool had taken the bait, the king ordered his soldiers to raid the human town, plundering wealth and capturing women and children as slaves. Meanwhile, Lilith received a letter from Merlin detailing his wonderful life in the Land of Light, where he lived in a magnificent castle, served by hundreds of attendants. Oh no! In reality, his castle was just a tent with a dog, and the hundreds of attendants were merely bounty hunters lurking to slit his throat. The letter boasted that Merlin was extremely popular with the ladies. They even lined up for his autograph. The truth was far from it. It was indeed the bounty hunters chasing him. Merlin reassured her not to worry, claiming his life was very exciting, and he wouldn't return unless other demon lords begged him in letters. Lilith felt delighted to hear her brother was okay, relieved that he wouldn't starve anymore. In the town where Merlin had come to leech, he entered a shop and took down the doorman. The shop owner recognized him and panicked. Merlin comfortably let the shopkeeper admire his handsome face, pretending to believe it. Finally, someone recognized him. It was the owner of the Pride Castle, the first demon palace. However, the shopkeeper only recognized him as the freeloader from the south, leaving Merlin utterly disappointed that his reputation as a demon lord had been tarnished by these petty side missions. The shopkeeper screamed for help, calling Merlin a southern freeloader, and immediately, people from all around rushed to assist. Not wanting to get caught up in some meaningless scuffles, Merlin hurriedly fled, shouting that he was not a freeloader. On his way, Merlin encountered a child, who was impressed by his appearance and offered to pay him if he would perform for them. He thought one performance would suffice, and demanded at least 10 gold coins for his show, but the child was not easily fooled, refusing to pay and calling Merlin a pathetic loser for trying to con people instead of getting a real job. Merlin couldn't stand the insolence of this 12-year-old. In retaliation, he snatched the child's ice cream and threw it to the ground. The child called Merlin a demon. But he didn't see that as an insult, because indeed, he was a demon. Merlin turned to walk away. Just then, a carriage rolled up, and Alice stepped out. She was on a mission, arriving with a group of adventurers. One of them wondered why Alice had been stripped of her hero title. At that moment, the man who had bought Alice's Midrin armor from Merlin. He began detailing how the Demon Lord had turned Alice into a slave and tortured her both physically and mentally. He might have heard these stories straight from Merlin when he purchased the armor. However, the girl trusted the bookseller more and said, well, everyone has a past they want to forget without having their reputation completely shattered. On a Monday, Alice pleaded with the bookseller to stop releasing that ridiculous book, but she also learned that over 5 million copies had already been sold. Hearing this, Alice went through what she called an existential crisis, spiraling into a state of deep depression. Finally, as she began to recover from that shock, the group was discussing their mission to hunt down the goblin gang lurking in the cave not far from the village. But before that, the couple in the group announced their wedding plans. Yet, Alice felt a sense of foreboding, sensing that these nameless side characters were destined to die for the plot. The couple talked about their future, casually mentioning things like their final mission, retirement, and returning home, assuring each other that nothing unexpected would happen. Doesn't anyone know what it means to speak too soon? No! Alice tried to stop them, but it was futile. She had to let them continue on their missions. As for Alice, she had her own mission to track down the freeloading mage from the south. Speaking of Merlin, he was at the tavern, devouring everything on the menu. Then, he tried to sneak out quietly, but was caught by the tavern manager. Merlin had to make up an excuse, claiming he was there to apply for a job. He boasted about graduating from the Royal Academy, listing all sorts of unbelievable skills, even saying he had never been in debt in his life. However, Matter was not impressed and deemed Merlin unfit for serving. to convince her. Merlin used skills he learned from the Demon Lord of Desire and started dancing disco with great flair. Eventually, Mata was persuaded she was even considering marrying Merlin. She hired him at a rate of 1 gold per hour and 15% commission on drink sales. Merlin had initially been joking, but he now genuinely wanted this job. Mata told Merlin he could start working that very night and casually mentioned that she'd deduct his meals from his first paycheck. Last year's a wise show. She introduced Merlin to her son, Henry. Henry was the child Merlin had met before, and this time, thanks to Mata's presence, he dared not provoke Merlin. Henry led him to the living room. Merlin's serving duties would begin in a few hours, so, for now, stay on the way there. Merlin tried to mend things with Henry, promising to teach him a legendary sword technique for free if he let go of the past. But Henry declined the opportunity, even going so far as to say that Merlin didn't even know how to wield a sword. The boy proudly declared that the only person he wanted to learn from was the Shadow Blade, as he idolized him as a warrior of justice. Merlin, filled with pride, revealed to Henry that he was, in fact, the Shadow Blade. But instead of being amazed, Henry kicked Merlin into the room and walked away in frustration. The adventurer group was now facing the goblin army. Life's twists never cease to amaze. Just as the pink-haired girl is about to meet her doom, her boyfriend signs a contract with a sorcerer. The sorcerer lends a link to save her. Back at the tavern, rookie Merlin juggles half-hearted serving duties. Though quick, customers aren't impressed, but Merlin couldn't care less, telling them they should feel honoured to be served by him personally, though he only shows this cheeky attitude toward male customers. With female patrons, he's all charm, even handing out free pastries. Not only is he stealing gold, but he's also stealing other men's girlfriends. He performs exclusively for the ladies, leaving them utterly enchanted. As for the men in the tavern, they're too confident to even look back. Still, Martar, the tavern owner, is thrilled her drink sales have skyrocketed. Merlin wants to record Martar's praise to brag to other demon lords. They'd never believe he'd come crawling back to Martar. She says every girl in town is head over heels for him and wants to seize the moment by putting his story in the papers. Merlin knows if that happens, his fearsome demon lord reputation will be tarnished. He won't allow it. Merlin pleads with Martar not to publish, saying he just wants a quiet life and promises to treat every customer well. Martar is melted by Merlin's sweet words. So much so, literally melted. But her son won't stand for it. He doesn't want this freeloader as his stepdad and warns Merlin that if he lays a finger on his mother, he'll make him regret it. Merlin keeps up the polite act with Martar, but secretly plans to teach that rude kid a lesson. Meanwhile, Alice wanders the town, searching for signs of that freeloader. When she overhears Henry is punching a tree, threatening to teach the nameless demon lord a lesson, calling him a freeloader. Alice shows the boy a wanted poster, but Henry refuses to look. He recognizes Merlin's sly grin, the freeloader Henry's talking about, working at his mother's tavern and seducing women into buying drinks, raking in half the year's revenue in just a few days. But the men in town want Alice to deal with him. He's stealing their women away. They even dangled a bag of gold in front of her if she agreed to help. Alice found herself amidst chaos, women shouting and clapping wildly as Merlin put on a flashy, over-the-top dance performance just for them. Though his eyes were hidden, his smile was unmistakable, the very grin from the wanted poster. Alice confirmed he was the infamous Southern freeloader, but knowing his skill at escape, she chose silence, creeping closer from the shadows. But just as she approached, stage lights shone directly on her. Merlin instantly noticed rather, he deliberately ignored her worthless presence and forced her into a dance. Yet, soon enough, he realized this was the half-baked heroine he once enslaved. A year ago, at that very moment, Alice also recognized the freeloader as Merlin. She froze for a long moment, memories flooding back of all he had destroyed in her life. Without hesitation, Alice drew her sword and plunged it repeatedly into his face. Merlin grabbed her arm, urging her to stay calm, reminding her they once shared a past. But Alice saw only an enemy and declared she sought revenge. Merlin pinned her down, trying to soothe her by recalling their times of harmony. She asked coldly if he felt any regret for abandoning her on that miserable beach. Pouring out her pain, she blamed him for every hardship she'd endured and demanded he take responsibility like a true man. Honestly, it sounded like a recipe for misunderstanding. The women around assumed Merlin had used and then discarded Alice. Well, it wasn't entirely a misunderstanding. Merlin sensed the crowd's misjudgment. He immediately asked Alice to clarify, but she only wept harder, demanding her armor back. The tavern closed early to handle the commotion, and the innkeeper was heartbroken, thinking Alice was Merlin's ex. She told Merlin to sort things out properly. Clearly pushed to his limits, Merlin told Alice to stop crying. If anyone should be crying, it's him. He blamed her for ruining the entire show. Saying it destroyed his reputation and cost him any chance of earning tonight. Yet Alice stood firm. She had her reasons and vowed to let him go only if he returned her armor. Merlin twitched, convinced that armor was a gift from Alice to thank him for saving her multiple times. Even if he had taken it, he reasoned, it was only fair since the Kingdom of Light had plundered countless treasures from the Darklands over generations. But Alice didn't care about any of that. No logic could sway her. She just wanted her armor back. Because if she could return it to the kingdom, maybe she could erase her debts. Sadly, the armor had been sold for tens of millions in gold and spent in a flash. Still, Merlin told her not to worry. To him, that armor was nothing but worthless junk anyway. Alice didn't even bother arguing. She threatened to have Merlin arrested if he didn't return the armor. Hearing this, Merlin just flashed a sly, knowing smile. Who did she think she was threatening? He reminded her coldly that it was he who'd slain the sea monster, with a single strike sending her strongest fleet fleeing in terror. They were so scared they even spread the dragon's dung on their ships to ward off the cursed aura. So it was laughable for her to think she could arrest him, or anyone else in this kingdom for that matter. Alice finally understood and tossed her sword aside, confessing she owed the kingdom 50 million gold coins. Merlin was stunned after all. All year long, she'd only owed a few thousand at most. No one could fathom how she carried such an enormous debt. But Merlin didn't know the whole story, that he was the root cause of it all. With a broken heart, Alice began to reveal everything. The kingdom had piled this crushing debt on her head for losing the armor Merlin had stolen, so she was forced to join the Adventurers Guild, taking on dangerous quests just to scrape together enough to repay the debts. Merlin brushed off Alice's woeful tale and immediately shifted his focus to the Adventurers Guild. He inquired if it was the guild with high rewards and god-tier enemies. For he needed both money and strong foes to survive. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, he urged Alice to show him how to become an adventurer. After learning the process, he began sweet-talking her, claiming that, as old friends, she should introduce him. He even made up some story about his childhood dream of becoming an adventurer. Admittedly, this guy was slick at weaving tales, but Alice saw right through his tricks and bluntly told him to scram. At that moment, Mata's son was wandering near the city gates in the dead of night. He refused to return to that leech of a man. Just then, the adventurer, who had previously made a deal with the goblin mage, appeared and urged the guards to open the gate. According to regulations, the gates were not to be opened after midnight, but he pleaded, claiming to be the only survivor of a mission who managed to escape here. The guard was naive and opened the gate, unaware of the lurking army. The goblin mage, who had made a deal with the adventurer, was the first to strike. He declared that he had never intended to negotiate, and that all of them would now become slaves. Henry overheard everything and panicked, quickly hiding behind a pile of dry grass, trembling in fear. Meanwhile, Alice stepped outside to calm herself. She wondered why the flamboyant demon king wanted to become an adventurer. She was frustrated because she could no longer claim the 5,000 gold reward. Catching Merlin was nearly impossible. The only certainty she had was that getting involved with him again would only bring bad luck. Her only remaining hope was to meet the prince in her dreams, the Sword of Darkness, for she believed he would save her from that demon. After venting her frustrations, she looked around and noticed nearby houses were ablaze. At that moment, 2 huge goblins burst into the tavern. Merlin thought they were customers and greeted them warmly, but when they declared their intention to rob, he swiftly tossed them both outside, reassuring the patrons. "There's nothing to fear. Once again, he scored points in everyone's eyes. Maria wondered why trouble was breaching the tavern at this hour and began to worry, because her son still hadn't returned home. Immediately, she ran outside to find her son, leaving Merlin to manage the tavern. Merlin cheerfully took on the responsibility, standing his ground against the waves of goblins that kept coming. After dispatching them, he grasped his sword and stepped outside to aid Maria, for if she got hurt, he wouldn't receive his pay. They dragged her away, intent on turning her into a slave. Henry wanted to save his mother, but his legs felt like lead deep down. He knew that stepping out of hiding meant walking to the altar. However, they kept making mistakes, charging at him recklessly. Each time, they met a gruesome end at his hands. At that moment, Alice appeared, confronting Merlin, accusing him of colluding with the goblins to attack the village. As the great demon lord, he would never stoop to collaborating with such contemptible creatures as the goblin heroes. Unwilling to waste time on her ridiculous accusations, Merlin turned to leave. Alice proposed they work together to save the villagers from the goblins. Merlin paused but had no intention of helping for free. He demanded 10,000 gold. Of course, Alice had no money, and it was Merlin who had put her in debt for 50,000 views in gold, so she would never pay him a single coin. With nothing more to say, Merlin continued to walk away, leaving Alice to fight alone. She began to attack, taking down each goblin one by one, despite their increasing numbers. Just then, a goblin sorceress appeared to confront Alice, declaring that even an elite sorceress like her couldn't defeat the goblin army alone. But then, a young goblin, the one who had fled when he saw Merlin enter the town, came running in tears, reporting that he had just witnessed that unspeakable monster take down half the goblin army on the other side of the town. The goblin sorceress immediately used her powers to see through her minions' eyes and witnessed Merlin mercilessly slaughtering them. His overwhelming power made her realize that if Merlin and Alice teamed up, they would surely face defeats. So, she decided to retreat to preserve her forces. A piercing whistle rang out, and all the goblins withdrew from the town. But the town was still not truly saved. Many had lost mothers, sisters, and even children taken by the goblins. At that moment, a suspicious man stepped forward, looking remarkably like a goblin in human disguise. He offered to protect the town for 1,000 gold. Desperate, the villagers believed this chubby man was a high-level bodyguard and pleaded with him to save their loved ones. But instead of acting, he told them to forget the past and think about the future, suggesting that their loved ones were likely taken by the goblins. At that moment, the real instigator of this entire tragedy stepped forward, announcing that the goblins only took people to make them slaves, and they were still alive in their lair. The gate guard refused to believe it, for he was the one who had been tricked into opening the gates for the goblins. The villagers surrounded him, calling him a traitor, and even the chubby man was about to strike him. But just then, Alice jumped in to protect him, clearly explaining why he had to make that decision. Alice urged everyone to stop blaming each other, to pick up their weapons, and join her in rescuing the captives. To prove her trustworthiness, she declared herself the 233rd ranked hero of the kingdom, but the villagers were even more suspicious, as they had heard rumours of her selling herself into slavery for the demon lord. The chubby imposter bodyguard chimed in, saying no, so they believed the slave of the demon lord, and the lackeys of the goblins even incited people to take revenge for their lost loved ones. Alice immediately recognised this man as not being good and gave him a powerful blow to the stomach. She continued to call on everyone to stand up and fight, not to be cowards. But no one stepped forward, and she reluctantly left alone. Seeing Alice walk away, Henry called everyone cowards and stood up to help her. He rushed back to the tavern to retrieve his father's old sword. On the way, Henry encountered 2 remaining goblins in the town. He tried to fight, but he was quickly overwhelmed. Fortunately, Merlin appeared just in time to save him once again. But he was still extremely frustrated at having to increase his patrol just to find matter while the goblins kept blocking his path. Merlin told Henry to go to sleep since it was late, but Henry couldn't do that because his mother had just been taken. Merlin advised the boy to think realistically, not to play the hero when he was still weak. If he acted recklessly, he would only end up dead, or enslaved. But Henry replied whether he was weak or not didn't mean he would just stand by and do nothing. He reminded Merlin of Alice's courage as she charged into danger to save others. And although he wasn't as strong as the Blade of Darkness, he was determined to save his mother at any cost. That naive yet fierce determination awakened something within Merlin. It reminded him of a time when he was just a child with his sister. He too had risked everything to protect his mother. Though it was just a fleeting memory, it showed that there was still a heart beneath his usual glimmer. At last, he decided to relent. For the first time in his demonic life, he chose not to act like a fiend and went to rescue Matter. Before leaving, he drew his sword and told Henry to feel honoured to witness the Lord's salvation, to save humankind. But as soon as he stepped out of the tavern, he realised the town was empty. The goblins had completely retreated, so he had to follow their trail all the way to their lair. Wonderful, just another task to add. Luckily, he overheard a group of people discussing heading to the goblin lair, so he pretended to casually offer to guide them, but they showed no interest. To them, he was just a useless freeloader in the tavern. Merlin asserted he was a reliable warrior, but they all just scoffed, thinking he only knew how to shake his hips to entertain the ladies. Henry immediately jumped in to defend him, saying Merlin had taken down 2 goblins to save his life. Yet, they still didn't believe it. Merlin shrugged, ready to relinquish the leader's position to the chubby man. Meanwhile, in the goblin lair, the Goblin King revelled in the success of their glorious attack. The goblin mage smugly declared this is just the beginning. Now, we can plunder the town at our leisure. The doctor warned villains who hog the spotlight for too long are bound to meet their end. Oh, let's not forget they've encountered 2 pesky individuals before, and they will surely return. So, traps have been set everywhere. Failure is not an option. Soon after, Merlin and his group approached the goblin den without a second thought. Henry charged in headfirst, igniting a wall of fire that engulfed Merlin, who didn't even bother to dodge. He traversed the long corridor of the cave and stepped into the grand hall, where Alice lay gasping for breath. The Goblin King, in true villainous fashion, began a lengthy monologue. Despite the impending doom, he remained fixated on the treasure behind him. He even shoved the Goblin King aside to get closer to the treasure, leaving his opponent speechless. Merlin, however, had no time for chatter. He simply told him to shut up before effortlessly slicing off the Goblin King's left arm, rescuing Alice. Seeing Alice in such a pitiful state tugged at Merlin's heart. He thought to himself that he couldn't take her back like this. Otherwise, the mage would definitely dock his pay. An ethical failure of 10 out of 10, no doubt. Alice, in pain, still worriedly asked everyone, "Is everyone okay?" Only after Merlin reassured her that everyone was safe did she finally faint. Merlin gently laid her down and turned his gaze to the Goblin King, who was beginning to regenerate his arm. The Goblin King appeared overly confident, while Merlin felt nothing but disdain for him. With foes like this, 1 strike would suffice, 2 would be overkill. Still, Merlin didn't even bother to draw his sword. He allowed the Goblin King to attack first, easily blocking all of his blows. Without even a glance, when the Goblin King roared in frustration, demanding to know who he was, Merlin replied that someone of his caliber didn't need to introduce himself. So he introduced himself as Daisy, much to the mockery of his foe. The Goblin King had no choice but to transform into his final form, preparing to unleash his ultimate attack. Merlin let him do as he pleased, thinking that if this move was strong enough, it might buy him an extra 15 to 20 days of life before he struck down the Goblin King. He even offered Merlin a final chance to surrender and become his subordinate. Merlin burst into maniacal laughter at that proposal, apologizing for not being able to contain himself. He boldly declared that no being in this world could compare to his radiance and power. Even the gods themselves couldn't withstand a fraction of his glory. He even added, "Goblin, he wasn't even worthy enough to be food for his beloved dragon." That was the tipping point. The Goblin King erupted in fury, unleashing his ultimate move not directed at Merlin, but at the unyielding spirit that stood before him. Yet, unyielding was only the beginning of true strength. Merlin had grown weary of the empty chatter that filled the air. At that moment, the Goblin King realized he was facing the Lord of Pride itself, for in his hands he wielded the legendary spiraling sword, a weapon that only he could master. Before the Goblin King could even plead for mercy, why? However, Merlin was able to recover a bit of his health after defeating a lowly foe. His strike shattered the statue behind the throne, revealing an even larger trove of gold. That scene seemed to cast Merlin into a blissful dream, a dream where he imagined reaching the pinnacle of his life, but the force of his blow caused the entire mountain above the cave to begin to collapse. Now, Merlin faced a choice: save Alice or seize the treasure. This time, his inner demon urged him to claim the treasure, while the other insisted he save Alice, for she could help him join the Adventurers Guild. That way, there would be more riches and stronger foes. Considering the long-term benefits and his promise to the demon, Merlin chose to rescue Alice, tears in his eyes for the colossal pile of gold he was leaving behind. Outside, but not quite. In truth, those tears were for the treasure he had lost. Later, at the tavern, Merlin sat beside the unconscious Alice, pondering whether to use his healing magic on her. He found it bothersome, grumbling that after giving up a mountain of gold, he now had to deal with this just to get her to introduce him to the Adventurers Guild. But if something happened to Alice, all his plans would crumble. So he ultimately decided to heal her. As he began removing Alice's armour, her mother and her son accidentally walked into the room. Witnessing Merlin in that vulnerable moment, they politely stepped back, naturally assuming that Merlin and Alice were a couple. Unfazed, Merlin continued his task with calm determination. After removing all of Alice's armour, Merlin leaned in with a seductive expression, as if to kiss her. But just as their lips were about to touch, he recoiled and began to spit on her. Though viewers might grimace at that, his saliva had healing properties, particularly effective on the opposite sex. In no time, the entire room was filled with bubbles of saliva, healing Alice's every wound. This was one of Molly's ultimate skills, and he had no intention of offering such a service for free again. While Alice was recovering, she dreamt of the dark blade and murmured in her sleep, praising Merlin's handsomeness and declaring her love for him. Merlin realized his skill not only healed but also stirred strange dreams. Nevertheless, he stayed awake that night, guarding Alice from any danger that might arise. The next morning, Alice woke to find Merlin had already left. Alice regained consciousness, and the female adventurer recounted everything that had happened after she was knocked unconscious by the Goblin King. But Alice couldn't believe that Merlin had saved her, left speechless in shock. The adventurer told Alice not to be angry, as every love has its quarrels, but Alice firmly insisted it was just a misunderstanding. They were merely bitter enemies. The adventurers prepared to leave the town after completing their mission. They thanked Alice for all she had done before departing. The female adventurer even teased Alice about how Merlin had stayed by her side all night, listening to her chatter and laughing quietly. In truth, it was Alice who had been mumbling in her sleep. Alice couldn't believe that Merlin had been beside her all night while she was unconscious. She was horrified to discover she wasn't wearing any clothes in the middle of the town. Meanwhile, Merlin noticed a crowd gathering around a reporter, covering the battle against the goblins. The rotund man claimed to be the hero who saved the village, boasting that he had single-handedly defeated all the goblins. But when he caught sight of Merlin's stern gaze, he hurriedly fled in fear of being struck down. Once the rotund man had left, the reporter turned to Merlin, and, of course, he confidently replied, "Just a few trivial matters. He merely waved his hand, and they were obliterated." The reporter turned to the camera, praising the townspeople for their miraculous turnaround. They even mentioned interviewing Alice, the former hero ranked 233 who had the misfortune of being knocked out by the Goblin King, and had even been captured by the Demon King and the Pirate King. The thought of that made Alice kneel in gratitude, which made Merlin chuckle. But upon entering the room, Alice unexpectedly attacked him, leaving him in disbelief. "You villain, you're insane!" He pinned Alice against the wall, questioning why she was so aggressive. He reminded her that she should be grateful and owe him thanks for saving her once again. But Alice was unconcerned. She accused Merlin of taking advantage of her when she was unconscious and vulnerable. Merlin explained that he had only removed her clothing to spit healing magic on her wounds. But Alice didn't believe him. She demanded to know why the female adventurer had heard strange noises coming from their room all night. The truth was revealed. Alice had been sleep-talking, mumbling things like, "Oh, you're so handsome. I don't love you." Alice was utterly mortified. Eventually, she began to trust Merlin. Merlin scolded her for being so ungrateful and insisted she thank him. Alice begrudgingly uttered her thanks, but Merlin pretended not to hear and made her repeat the familiar phrase. Yet he still wouldn't accept it, reminding her that he had given up an entire cave full of gold for her. So now she had to introduce him to the Adventurers Guild as a return favour. Alice agreed. Merlin officially quit his job, bidding farewell to his female fans and the aunts as he said goodbye to the demon. Henry reminded Henry to take good care of their mother, for he would no longer be there to protect them. With everything settled, Merlin and Alice boarded the carriage. Merlin commented on how absurd it was that everyone thought they were a couple. Alice finally agreed, adding that she would never date that Vu, who danced like Merlin. Merlin shot back in anger, and thus the quarrel between the star-crossed lovers reignited, setting the stage for their long journey ahead. Meanwhile, at that very moment, a lucky goblin wizard, having survived, heard the news of the Goblin King's demise and resolved to move his troops south to evade Samalin. But just then, a mysterious woman emerged from the rubble, revealing she had obtained the third key to unlock Hell Legend from the treasure. She couldn't leave any witnesses, so she annihilated the Goblin Wizard's treasure and all of his troops. A few hours later, Merlin and Alice arrived at the Adventurers Guild. Lucia asked Merlin if he was Alice's boyfriend, which made Alice so furious that she immediately sold out Merlin, revealing he was the wanted parasite in the south, with a bounty of 5,000 gold. Alice explained that someone with a criminal record couldn't become an adventurer, so she told Tan that he needed to pay off his debts to clear his criminal record and become an adventurer under her supervision to work off his debt. Lucia agreed, but Alice found a loophole. In the bounty hunting mission, he would only receive 50 gold instead of 5,000. Lucia turned to Merlin and said that Alice cared for him deeply. He only agreed to sacrifice himself like that, making Merlin feel so exasperated he wanted to confess, but Alice wouldn't allow it. He got furious, blaming her for exposing him and costing him the entire Golden Cave. The two began to argue once more, while Lucia prepared Merlin for the rank assessment test. Merlin wondered what the highest position that the strongest demon king in the world could achieve was. Low-level warriors were ranked bronze, then silver, gold, and the highest was the saint for the holy-level warriors. Merlin couldn't believe that divine beings were ranked the highest, so he asked Lucia to create an even higher rank because he believed he deserved it. Lucia thought he was joking, but still spoke of the legendary amethyst rank reserved for heroes of immense power. Merlin joyfully urged Lucia to enroll him directly into the amethyst rank without the exam. Lucia still thought he was joking and didn't take his words seriously. A red-haired guy named Hope, a friend of Alice, Cois, overheard their conversation from behind. He approached to see, bringing along an AI. Another guy named Alan also entered the guild, heartbroken to find Alice with someone else. Immediately, he knelt down to propose to Alice, reminding her that she had rejected him multiple times. Even though he was the son of a noble woman, Alice clarified that she was still single and not dating Merlin or anyone else. Before Merlin could react, Alice challenged him to a duel right there. The winner would have the right to date Alice. Martin didn't care and didn't want to get involved with this half-baked former hero, so he surrendered immediately. But Anod wouldn't accept defeat, and believed Martin was mocking him as the son of a count. He couldn't accept being outdone by Merlin, who was so mediocre. He boldly declared he would save Alice from the wicked Merlin. Alice, unfazed by the trouble, smashed Anod's face ID and told him to wake up. Anod ignored her, charging at Merlin with his sword. With a mere flick of his wrist, Merlin sent Anod flying. Alice scolded Merlin for hitting him too hard. Yet, deep down, she found herself grateful she secretly enjoyed it. Merlin's brief display of power made him the centre of attention in the guild. Everyone, including Hoffman, pondered whether Merlin might be as strong as the elite. Merlin took this as an insult and prepared to draw his sword. He turned to Hobbs, asking who he thought was the useless one like the elite. Fortunately, Alice intervened just in time to hold Merlin back before he could destroy the city. She reassured Hobbs, who was praising Merlin, that true elites were indeed rare. Merlin heard this and decided to let it slide, but proclaimed he would elevate the entire guild of adventurers. At that moment, a gloomy man named Clow appeared, blocking their path. Merlin told him to step aside. He didn't care much, but Alice sensed Clow's danger and advised Merlin against causing trouble on his first day. Both focused on Clow, who was about to take the rank assessment test. And the result was he achieved the rank of St. Lucia. Clow was registered into the Adventurers Guild at the Midrin rank, and everyone was excited since there was only one other member of that rank, the Guildmaster. Meanwhile, Merlin was unimpressed. He simply didn't want a weakling like Clow to steal his spotlight. Merlin stepped up for his own test, forcing everyone to kneel before his true power. But unexpectedly, the crystal orb didn't shine, meaning Merlin had no combat aura at all. All the guild members looked at Merlin with disdain, believing this braggart was just a weakling after all. What's worse, Lucia thought Merlin wasn't even qualified to be an adventurer because he lacked a combat aura. Merlin revealed that he had no magic or combat aura, shocking Alice to her core. But she wasn't surprised either, knowing Merlin was still incredibly powerful with just a single blow. He asserted he was definitely strong enough to be an adventurer. However, Lucia believed Alice was just blinded by her affection for Merlin. Merlin tried to convince Lucia by recounting his moment, but he was still seen as just boasting. Some behind him mocked that if there were a rank for braggers, Merlin would surely earn the amethyst tier. Yet, Merlin remained steadfast, and, to prove his strength, demanded Lucia call the Guildmaster for a duel. He was supremely confident he would defeat him. Everyone thought Merlin was exaggerating again, as usual. Since joining the guild, the former Guildmaster of the Saint rank had heard Merlin's boasting and accepted his challenge to the guild's arena. He proudly proclaimed he had defeated countless powerful warriors here, but Merlin ignored him, casually picking his nose. This rudeness infuriated the Guildmaster to no end. He told Merlin to unleash all his skills. If Merlin could make him move even a single step from his original position, he would acknowledge his victory and allow him to register as an adventurer. Merlin was allowed to unleash his full power and used his sword to obliterate everything. Meanwhile, Alice hoped Merlin wouldn't seriously injure the Guildmaster. But right after that, the explosion, the adventurers thought it was the Guildmaster himself trying to teach Merlin a lesson. However, Merlin emerged unscathed, promising Alice he hadn't harmed the Guildmaster because he needed him to witness his strength. Soon after, the Guildmaster came out trembling and staggering, demanding Lucia bring him a new set of clothes since he had soiled his from fear. Still, Merlin was registered as a steel rank adventurer, despite having just defeated the strongest in the guild. Alice consoled Merlin, saying he should be happy since he was the only special case allowed to become an adventurer, even after failing the assessment. Merlin asked Alice what her next plan was, then entrusted her to choose the quests while he would handle the saint-level enemies solo. He wanted to start with 100 quests each month, calculating they would earn around 10,000 gold each month. Merlin dreamed of monopolizing the entire adventurer profession and promised to generously share 10% of the profits with Alice. However, Alice was not impressed and bluntly told Merlin to get lost. As Merlin walked away, he cursed Alice for still being clueless after all this time. Despite his hunger, Merlin lacked the money to buy food and had no place to stay for the night. Ultimately, he ended up crashing at Alice's house while she was showering. When Alice stepped out and heard footsteps, she accidentally dropped her towel. Talk about fan service, Merlin then casually plopped down on Alice's sofa, munching on her food without bothering to explain why he was there. Alice asked if he came to spy on her. Merlin replied that she had nothing worth spying on. This irritated her. She kept pestering him with questions at every turn. She complimented him, saying he only wanted to move in to protect her. Of course, for a small fee of 1,000 gold per month right away. He begged her to open the door. This useless guy had been abandoned, hadn't he? Hearing the noise, Alice quickly pulled Merlin inside to prevent him from embarrassing her. She drew her sword, intending to turn Merlin into gold for his incessant chatter, but he skillfully dodged all her attempts and dashed upstairs to her bedroom. He shamelessly declared he would live here from now on, insisting they were best friends, so he wouldn't charge her for protection anymore. Alice tried to trap him, but suddenly she accidentally fell onto him. Merlin asked her if she wanted to share a bed, but before she could answer, he wrapped her in a blanket, and with a gentle wave of his hand, she drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next day, Alice stormed into the workshop, furious, blaming Merlin along with Lucia and Hope for the fact that Merlin had moved into her home. Now she had to sleep on the floor, and her back was aching horribly. However, Hope thought the problem was Alice's fiery temper, urging her to calm down, but this only made her angrier. Having just woken up, Merlin swaggered into the workshop, proudly boasting to Lucia, Hope, and Anon that they were living together, which made everyone think they were already romantically involved, but he still wanted to win her back. So he challenged Merlin. This time, it wasn't a sword fight, but a competition between adventurers. The one who scored the most points would win. The task was to eliminate a large number of undead creatures lurking in the black marshes. At first, Merlin didn't care, but when he learned the reward was a whopping 5,000 gold coins, he agreed to take on the quests. He asked Lucia for permission to accept this mission, but Lucia insisted he couldn't go alone. Since he was at the Iron rank, Merlin proposed teaming up with Alice, but she wanted nothing to do with him. He seized the opportunity to invite Alice into his team, boasting that he had hired a high-ranking adventurer at a hefty price. He promised that if Alice joined, they would split the entire 5,000 gold reward. Merlin countered that if Alice cooperated with him, she would receive 10% of the reward, which was more than Anon's equal share. Alice, realizing this, agreed to join Alan's team just to tease Merlin, leaving Merlin to ponder where he would find teammates. Ultimately, he chose Hope, who was dead drunk, and kidnapped him. When Hope sobered up and found himself sitting in a carriage with Merlin, he demanded an explanation. Merlin claimed that Hope had begged him to take him on this dangerous mission. Exactly. They would be fine because he had experience dealing with monsters.